The gangster rap world has been shaken again, this time by the violent death of the performer known as Notorious B.I.G.
When new footage connected to the murder of the Notorious B.I.G. surfaced in a recent Netflix documentary produced by 50 Cent, the reaction was immediate and intense. Viewers didn't just watch the scene, they froze. There was no dramatic announcement, no warning, no build-up. The footage appeared quietly, almost casually. Yet it carried the weight of nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions. Within minutes, the internet began buzzing with disbelief. People weren't asking what they saw. They were asking how something like this had never been seen before. For almost 30 years, Biggie Smalls' death has remained one of hip-hop's greatest unsolved tragedies. Investigators, journalists, and fans believed they had already examined every available piece of evidence. Security cameras, eyewitness accounts, police files, all of it had been reviewed countless times. Or so everyone thought. This newly revealed clip shattered that assumption completely. It wasn't recycled footage. It wasn't grainy background video. It was sharp, controlled, and disturbingly clear. What made the footage even more unsettling was its angle. It wasn't captured from a commonly discussed security camera. It wasn't part of the usual museum or hotel surveillance tapes that have been analyzed for years. Instead, it appeared to come from an elevated, almost hidden position, a viewpoint that offered a prospective investigator, rarely acknowledged publicly. The framing alone raised a chilling possibility. Someone knew exactly where to place that camera. March 9, 1997, didn't begin as a chaotic or dangerous night on the surface. Los Angeles felt calm, almost ordinary. Biggie Smalls was in town promoting his music, moving through industry events with his team. Despite ongoing tension between East Coast and West Coast hip-hop at the time, Biggie appeared relaxed, smiling for cameras, greeting fans, and conducting business as usual. The Peterson Automotive Museum party was crowded with industry figures, artists, executives, and media personalities. Music played loudly. Laughter filled the air. People were networking, celebrating, and enjoying the moment. Yet beneath the surface, there was a quiet tension. Biggie was aware of his environment. He moved with security, followed protocols, and stayed close to his circle. Fame feels different when danger has followed you for months. When the event wrapped up, the crowd spilled onto the street. Cars lined up along Fairfax Avenue. Cameras flashed as people called out names and waved goodbye. Biggie exited calmly, climbed into his SUV, and settled into the passenger seat. Nothing about the moment felt unusual. The convoy pulled away smoothly, blending into regular Los Angeles traffic. Then the traffic light turned red. That pause, that brief moment of stillness, has haunted hip-hop history ever since. As Biggie's SUV stopped at the intersection, engines idled quietly. His team rode in the vehicle ahead, chatting casually. No alarms, no signs of danger. Just another red light on a normal street. Then, from the right side of the frame, a dark vehicle began to move into position. This is where the new footage changes everything. The vehicle didn't rush. It didn't wobble. It approached with unnatural calm, moving at a controlled pace that immediately felt deliberate. The driver's posture appeared steady, focused, almost relaxed. This wasn't someone acting on impulse. This looked planned. Within seconds, the window lowered. Gunshots rang out, sharp, fast, echoing off surrounding buildings. People froze in disbelief. Security reacted too late. Tires screeched as chaos erupted. Biggie Smalls, one of the most influential voices in hip-hop history, was hit before anyone could intervene. And then came the detail that has never sat right with investigators or fans. The suspect vehicle did not speed away wildly. It glided off smoothly. No panic, no reckless escape. Just a controlled disappearance into the Los Angeles night. When viewers began examining the footage frame by frame, the story became even more disturbing. The suspect vehicle didn't appear from behind like a car caught in traffic. It didn't come from an open lane. Instead, it emerged from an unusual angle, as if it had been waiting just outside the camera's view until Biggie's SUV became trapped at the light. That timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. Then there was the driver. Although the face was obscured, the silhouette revealed enough to spark debate. The posture suggested confidence, not hesitation. The hands remained steady on the wheel. This didn't resemble someone panicking or acting emotionally. It looked like someone carrying out instructions. Another overlooked detail quickly gained attention. A brief reflection off chrome just before the shots were fired. Not a muzzle flash, but a glint bouncing across nearby surfaces. Some viewers believe it could indicate a signal or final adjustment. What's disturbing is that this detail had never been mentioned in police reports or interviews. Even more unsettling was what appeared in the background. At the far edge of the frame, another vehicle seemed to move subtly. It crept forward, paused, then backed away. The motion was smooth and controlled. Too quiet to be random. Too precise to be ignored. Was it a witness? Or something else entirely? The footage doesn't explain these details. It lets them linger quietly, dangerously. As the shock settled, a question emerged that felt heavier than anything shown on screen. Why did this footage remain hidden for nearly 3 decades? Cameras don't record without someone reviewing the tape. Footage doesn't simply vanish. For this clip to stay unseen, someone had to catalog it, store it, and ultimately decide it wouldn't be shared. Some argue it was lost in archives. Others believe it was flagged early as too sensitive, evidence that raised more questions than investigators wanted to answer. The original investigation into Biggie's death was chaotic from the beginning. Conflicting witness accounts, distrust between law enforcement and the hip-hop community, political pressure, media frenzy. In that environment, evidence that complicated the narrative may have been quietly sidelined. And when people realized this footage captured angles never publicly discussed, suspicion grew. Not the suspicion of oversight, but the suspicion of intentional silence. Because lost footage eventually resurfaces by accident. Hidden footage resurfaces by decision. The timing of the reveal raised immediate eyebrows. Why now? Why through a Netflix documentary? And why with 50 Cent involved? To many fans, the answer lies in understanding how history and culture intersect. 50 Cent understands legacy. He understands how narratives shape perception. And he understands timing. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't shock for clicks. This was a calculated release. The footage wasn't framed loudly or sensationally. It wasn't explained away. It was presented quietly, allowing viewers to discover its significance on their own. That choice transformed the audience into investigators, forcing them to notice what had been missed for decades. In doing so, the documentary shifted power away from institutions and back to the public. Once the footage aired, the reaction across hip-hop culture was immediate. Social media exploded. Blogs posted non-stop updates. Forums dedicated to old-school hip-hop analysis erupted with frame-by-frame breakdowns. Fans weren't just watching, they were searching. For Biggie's legacy, the footage reopened wounds that never fully healed. For the culture, it reignited frustration, anger, and a deep sense of unfinished truth. And for many, it confirmed what they had long suspected. The full story of that night was never told clearly. The footage doesn't solve the case. It doesn't name suspects. It doesn't close the book. What it does is far more powerful. It proves the mystery was never finished. And now, the story of Biggie Smalls isn't just about how he died, it's about what was hidden, who chose silence, and why the truth waited nearly 30 years to step back into the light. Once the shock of the newly revealed footage settled in, attention shifted away from the night itself and toward what happened afterward. Because for many people, the most disturbing part of Biggie Smalls' murder has never been the shooting alone. It's the investigation that followed. Or, more accurately, the investigation that seemed to stall before it ever truly began. In the days after Biggie's death, Los Angeles was flooded with media, speculation, and outrage. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. This wasn't just another unsolved homicide. This was the killing of one of the biggest artists in the world. A cultural figure whose death sent shockwaves through music, race relations, and American pop culture. And yet, despite the attention, the case quickly became tangled in confusion, contradictions, and unanswered questions. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. Some described the suspect vehicle one way, others described it completely differently. Sketches were released, then quietly revised. Leads appeared promising, only to disappear without explanation. Over time, the investigation began to feel less like a pursuit of truth and more like a maze with no exit. The resurfaced footage only deepened that unease. Because if this camera angle existed, if this perspective was available, then it raises an uncomfortable possibility. Investigators may have had access to more information than the public was ever told. To understand why Biggie's case unraveled the way it did, it's impossible to ignore the climate of Los Angeles in the late 1990s. Tensions between the LAPD and the hip-hop community were already strained. High-profile cases, allegations of corruption, and deep mistrust shaped how information was shared or withheld. Hip-hop artists didn't trust the police. The police didn't understand the culture. And somewhere between those two realities, the truth struggled to survive. At the time, East Coast-West Coast tensions dominated headlines. Rivalries were exaggerated, narratives were simplified, and complex realities were reduced to sound bites. Biggie's murder was often framed as just another chapter in that rivalry, rather than a carefully examined crime scene requiring deep investigation. That framing mattered. Because once a narrative takes hold, evidence that challenges it becomes inconvenient. Over the years, certain names repeatedly surfaced in discussions surrounding Biggie's case, not as suspects, but as individuals who may have mishandled information. Allegations emerged suggesting that some officers involved in the investigation had personal or professional conflicts that should have disqualified them from participating. None of these allegations were ever conclusively proven in court, but the consistency of the rumors kept the questions alive. Why were certain leads never pursued? Why were some witnesses dismissed so quickly? Why did internal reports contradict public statements? The newly revealed footage adds pressure to these questions, because if this angle existed, it means someone saw details the public didn't. And if those details were ignored, the reason matters just as much as the footage itself. One of the most debated elements after the footage surfaced was the route Biggie's convoy took that night. For years, it was assumed that the route was spontaneous, shaped by traffic and circumstance. But the footage suggests something else entirely. The positioning of the suspect vehicle implies foreknowledge not just of the location, but of timing. That level of precision doesn't happen by accident. It suggests planning, coordination, and information. And once you accept that possibility, the list of questions multiplies. Who knew the route? Who knew where Biggie would be sitting in the vehicle? Who knew the exact moment the convoy would stop? Those aren't questions aimed at street-level suspects alone. They point upward, toward systems, communication, and access. Despite years of investigation, Biggie Smalls' murder was never officially solved. No arrests, no convictions, just theories layered on top of theories. For some, the passage of time turned the case into legend. For others, it became a symbol of injustice, proof that even the most famous victims can be denied closure. The resurfaced footage disrupts that resignation. It refuses to let the case rest quietly. It forces a reconsideration of what was known, what was ignored, and what may have been deliberately buried. And that's why this moment feels different. Not because it finally answers everything, but because it proves the story isn't finished. Another uncomfortable reality raised by the footage is the role media played in shaping public perception. Early reporting often relied on unofficial sources, leaked information, and assumptions. Over time, those early narratives hardened into facts, even when evidence didn't fully support them. The new footage challenges that process. It reminds viewers that truth is not always what is repeated the most, it's what survives scrutiny. And for decades, much of Biggie's story was accepted without being re-examined. That may be changing now. What makes this moment powerful is not just the footage itself, but the reaction it triggered. People are asking questions again. Not casually, seriously. Analysts, journalists, and former insiders are revisiting files, interviews, and timelines that had gone cold. The resurfacing of this clip didn't reopen the case officially, but culturally, it reopened something just as important: attention. And attention is dangerous when secrets exist. As conversations continue to grow, one thing is certain: this footage has altered the way Biggie Smalls' death is discussed. It has shifted focus from speculation to evidence, from rumor to structure, from what if to why wasn't this shown. And that leads directly into the next chapter. Because once you accept that this footage was hidden, the next logical question becomes unavoidable: who benefited from keeping it hidden? And who benefits from releasing it now? That question takes us deeper into the industry, deeper into power, and deeper into motives that go far beyond one night in Los Angeles. And that's exactly where this story heads next. As the footage continued circulating, something unusual happened. Instead of fading into the endless cycle of internet outrage, the conversation deepened. People weren't just reacting emotionally anymore, they were connecting dots. Journalists began revisiting old interviews. Retired detectives were asked questions they hadn't heard in years. Even individuals who had stayed silent since the late 1990s started speaking carefully, choosing their words with visible caution. As this newly surfaced footage continues to circulate, it has forced people to look at Biggie Smalls' murder from an entirely different angle. What once felt like a closed chapter in hip-hop history now feels unfinished again. The images on that tape don't just raise questions about the shooting itself. They raise deeper concerns about what information may have been available at the time, and why it was never fully explored. For many viewers, the most unsettling part isn't what the footage shows, but what it implies. With this new perspective, the original investigation feels increasingly incomplete. The case was filled with contradictions from the very beginning. Witnesses who described different vehicles, timelines that didn't line up, and leads that quietly disappeared. At the time, these inconsistencies were often blamed on chaos, confusion, or lack of cooperation. Now, however, the resurfaced footage suggests that the issue may not have been confusion at all, but selective attention. certain details may have been easier to ignore than to confront. The environment surrounding the case in the late 1990s also plays a critical role in understanding how events unfolded. Los Angeles was already dealing with deep mistrust between law enforcement and the hip-hop community. High-profile cases, allegations of misconduct, and cultural tension created a climate where cooperation was fragile and transparency was rare. Biggie's murder occurred in the middle of that storm, making it easier for important questions to get lost or avoided altogether. Another troubling element is how quickly the narrative around Biggie's death became simplified. Rather than being treated strictly as a complex homicide, the case was often framed as another tragic moment in the East Coast versus West Coast rivalry. While that storyline captured headlines, it also narrowed the scope of investigation. Evidence that didn't fit neatly into that narrative may not have received the attention it deserved, allowing crucial details to fade into the background. As people continue to analyze the footage, the role of silence becomes impossible to ignore. Over the years, public discussion around the case slowly diminished. Media coverage decreased, and the lack of resolution became something many simply accepted. But silence can be powerful. It can protect institutions, preserve reputations, and keep uncomfortable truths out of reach. The resurfacing of this footage disrupts that silence, forcing old questions back into the conversation. What is happening now feels less like a sudden revelation and more like a delayed reckoning. The footage does not offer clear answers or name those responsible, but it challenges the version of events that has been accepted for decades. It reminds people that unresolved cases do not disappear, they wait. And when they return, they often do so at a moment when the public is finally willing to listen. For hip-hop culture, this moment carries particular weight. Biggie Smalls was more than an artist. He was a symbol of an era and a voice that helped shape the genre's identity. Leaving his story incomplete has always felt wrong to many fans. The renewed attention sparked by this footage doesn't bring closure, but it restores a sense of urgency.